A 16-month-old baby. Completely defenseless. Utterly reliant on the adults around her. Imagine that tiny life, full of untapped potential, brutally cut short by a senseless act. Now, consider what you would expect justice to look like in such a case. Prepare to be stunned, because in the case of this innocent child, the punishment given to the person responsible was so shockingly light, so unbelievably short, it leaves you questioning everything. Did justice truly exist here? Or was this another tragedy on top of a tragedy? Welcome to Crime Stories Network. I thank you, my viewers, for your support as we keep bringing true crime stories, especially against children abuse, neglect and exploitation. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. LaGrange County, Indiana. 2009, a place often described as peaceful, its communities built on generations of shared history and close family ties. In such places, people often rely on each other, and family bonds are considered sacred. But in this seemingly tranquil corner of the Midwest, a devastating story was about to unfold, one that would expose a shocking betrayal within a family and send ripples of grief and disbelief through the entire community. The story centers on a young family, the Guernseys. Kelly Sprunger was a mother navigating life's challenges, raising her children in LaGrange County. Her youngest was Alissa, a bright and bubbly 16-month-old baby girl, the baby of the family. Tragically, Alissa's father, Michael Guernsey, had died in a car accident. This loss had deeply impacted the family, and Kelly, understandably, was struggling to get back on her feet while caring for Alissa and her siblings. Seeking support during this difficult time, Kelly turned to family, a natural instinct in close-knit communities like LaGrange County. She asked her cousin, Christy Schaefer, for help with Alissa. Christy was family, someone Kelly had known her whole life. It was meant to be a temporary arrangement, a helping hand from one relative to another in a time of need. A mother reaching out to family for support, a seemingly act of trust and reliance. In late 2008, Alissa was placed in Christy Schaefer's care. What was intended as a short-term solution, a period of family support to help Kelly through a difficult time, would soon devolve into a nightmare. Unknown to Kelly, and to the wider community, a horrific betrayal was brewing behind closed doors. Christy Schaefer. She was Kelly Sprunger's cousin. Family. In the close-knit world of LaGrange County, that meant something significant. Born in 1979, Christy was about 30 years old in 2009, when Alissa came into her care. She lived in a mobile home in the area, not far from Kelly and her family. To the outside world, Christy presented as an ordinary member of the community. Someone familiar, someone known. When Kelly Sprunger found herself struggling after the tragic loss of her husband, Michael, turning to Christy for help seemed like a natural step. Christy was family. She had offered to care for 16-month-old Alissa, providing Kelly with much-needed support as she navigated the difficult path of single motherhood and grief. It was intended to be a temporary arrangement, a cousin helping cousin, a familiar act of familial support within their community. Kelly needed to work, to provide for her children, and knowing Alissa was with family offered a sense of reassurance, a sense of security in a time of immense personal upheaval. But beyond the surface of this seemingly helpful cousin, there were aspects of Christy Schaefer's life that remained less visible, less discussed within the family circle. While details of her personal history are limited in public records, it's known that Christy had her own challenges. She is a mother herself, raising her son, and life in rural Indiana, like anywhere, could be demanding. Whether these challenges played a role in the tragedy that unfolded remains a question that investigators would later grapple with. What is clear is that Kelly Sprunger placed her trust in Christy Schaefer. She entrusted her youngest child, her precious Alissa, into Christy's care, believing she was leaving her daughter with family, with someone who would love and protect her. It was a decision made out of necessity, out of faith in familial bonds. A decision that would prove to have devastating, irreversible consequences. Because within the walls of Christy Schaefer's mobile home, a dark and terrible secret was about to take root, a secret that would ultimately claim the innocent life of 16-month-old Alissa Guernsey. Alissa Guernsey's placement with Christine Matthew Schaefer, while presented as a family-based solution, was, in fact, initiated by the Department of Child Services. DCS intervention, triggered by Kelly Sprunger's past struggles, led to the 13-month-old Alissa and her siblings being placed in the Schaefer's care in December of 2008. This wasn't foster care with strangers, but a placement within the family, intended to be a temporary measure while Kelly addressed her challenges. Initially, there were no overt red flags. Just days after arriving at the Schaefer home, on December 19, 2008, Alissa was examined by Dr. John Egley, a pediatrician who would become a recurring figure in this tragic narrative. Dr. Egley's first examination was routine. He documented Alissa as a well-developed, well-nourished, pleasant and cooperative toddler, noting her weight and height were within the average range. On paper, at least, Alissa appeared to be adjusting well to her new environment. However, beneath this veneer of normalcy, a disturbing pattern was beginning to emerge. Almost immediately after moving in with the Schaefers, Alissa started to experience a series of alarming injuries. These injuries, coupled with Christy Schaefer's increasingly evasive behavior, should have raised immediate concerns. But tragically, they did not. Starting in late January 2009, Alissa was repeatedly brought to Dr. Egley for a string of what were presented as accidental injuries. These visits became increasingly frequent, almost weekly, each time with Christy offering explanations that, in retrospect, were flimsy and unconvincing. But at the time, these explanations were seemingly accepted, and the escalating pattern of injuries went tragically unheeded. Let's look at the documented instances. On January 27, 2009, just over a month after being placed with the Schaefers, Alissa was taken to Dr. Egley for stitches to close a cut on her forehead. Christy claimed it was from a fall. Less than 2 weeks later, on February 14, Valentine's Day, a day meant to celebrate love, Christy brought Alissa back to Dr. Egley, this time with complaints of hair loss and easy bruising. Dr. Egley himself noted rashes, scabs, and bruises all over Alissa's face. He attributed these to an infection and ordered blood tests. The tests came back normal. Alissa was, medically speaking, a healthy child. A healthy child, with a growing collection of alarming and unexplained injuries. Then, on March 3, Alissa was back again, this time with an injury to her left arm and a bruise near her left eye. More hair loss was also noted. Christy's explanation. Hyperactive dogs had supposedly knocked Alissa down. Dr. Egley, incredibly, seemed to accept this explanation, even telling DCS over the phone that he suspected nothing unusual. Just 2 days later, on March 5, a CT scan revealed the devastating truth: Alissa's arm was broken. A specialist, Dr. Robert Fallon, was consulted. He, too, found no underlying medical condition to explain the fracture. Instead of considering abuse, Dr. Fallon proposed a theory that defied logic, that a 16-month-old baby could break her arm by simply moving in her crib. Week after week, visit after visit, the pattern was clear: Alissa Guernsey, in the care of Christy Schaefer, was accumulating a shocking number of injuries. Each time, explanations were offered, explanations that became increasingly improbable. And each time, the medical professionals, and the system designed to protect her, failed to see the truth that was becoming horrifyingly obvious. The truth that a small, defenseless child was being systematically abused. With Alissa Guernsey's death officially declared at Parkview Lagrange Hospital, the scene shifted from a medical emergency to a criminal investigation. Lagrange County Sheriff's Department detectives were called in. The mobile home on County Road 1000 West, just hours earlier a family residence, was now a potential crime scene. The immediate priority, to determine how a seemingly healthy 16-month-old baby could suddenly die. The autopsy, conducted by Dr. Scott Wagner at the St. Joseph Forensic Center, became the cornerstone of the investigation. The preliminary findings were stark and undeniable. Alissa Guernsey had died as a result of blunt force trauma to the head. This wasn't a sudden infant death. This wasn't an accident. This was homicide. The medical examiner's official ruling changed everything. The focus of the investigation immediately narrowed. And suspicion fell squarely on the person who had been with Alissa in her final hours, her caregiver, Christy Schaefer. Detectives began to piece together the events of Saturday, March 28, and the preceding weeks. Christy Schaefer was interviewed. Initially, she presented a narrative of accidental injury, of a child prone to accidents, of a sudden, unexplained medical crisis. But as investigators delved deeper, inconsistencies began to emerge. Her account of Alissa's condition in the car, her delay in calling 911, and the escalating pattern of injuries documented in Dr. Egley's medical records, all of it began to paint a picture far different from the one Christy Schaefer was trying to portray. The autopsy report revealed the full, horrifying extent of Alissa's suffering. Beyond the fatal head trauma, Dr. Wagner documented numerous bruises across Alissa's head, face, and thigh. He found cuts inside her mouth. He observed significant hair loss, determined to be from hair being forcibly pulled out, not natural shedding. And he confirmed the broken left elbow, with a growth plate displacement, an injury far too severe to be explained by a simple fall or restless movement in a crib. Internally, the pathologist discovered bilateral subdural hematoma, bleeding in the brain, a clear indicator of repeated, severe head trauma. Compounding Christy Schaefer's increasingly unbelievable explanations, toxicology reports revealed another lie. Christy had claimed to be giving Alissa the prescription pain medication Vicodin. But toxicology analysis of Alissa's blood found no trace of Vicodin, only the Narcan administered by doctors at the hospital. This confirmed that Christy Schaefer had been systematically misleading medical professionals, and now, law enforcement. The web of deceit was tightening. And the truth about what happened to Alissa Guernsey was beginning to surface. A truth far more terrible than anyone in Lagrange County could have imagined. The autopsy declared it homicide. Blunt force trauma. But in the eyes of the Lagrange County legal system, the path to justice for Alissa Guernsey would be anything but straightforward. In a move that shocked many, and raised immediate questions about transparency, the prosecutor, Jeffrey Weibel, decided to present the case to a grand jury. For a case that seemed, on the surface, to be a clear-cut instance of fatal child abuse, this procedural choice shrouded the initial legal steps in secrecy. The grand jury proceedings concluded with an indictment, but not for murder. Christy Schaefer, the woman whose actions had directly led to Alissa's horrific death, was indicted on 2 counts of felony neglect of a dependent. Felony neglect. Not for causing the death of a child, but for neglect. And even these charges were not equal. One count was a Class B felony, the other a Class C. Neither of these charges, crucially, legally required proof that Christy Schaefer intended to cause Alissa's death. The Class C charge was eventually dropped altogether. In a move that would further fuel public outrage, Christy Schaefer's legal team negotiated a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to the Class B felony neglect charge, neglect for failing to seek medical attention for Alissa as she lay dying from blunt force trauma to the head. The manner of death, homicide, remained unchanged. But the charge, and the subsequent sentencing, would become a lightning rod for criticism, a focal point for those who felt justice was being tragically denied. In May 2011, Judge Scott Vanderbeck handed down his sentence, 10 years in prison. On the surface, it might have seemed like a significant sentence. But the reality was far more lenient. Judge Vanderbeck suspended 6 of those 10 years. Christy Schaefer was to serve just 4 years behind bars. And then, in a move that ignited a firestorm of public anger, Judge Vanderbeck inexplicably modified the sentence again, just months later. Christy Schaefer was released after serving a mere 77 days in custody. 77 days for the life of a 16-month-old baby brutally killed. The leniency of the sentence was impossible to ignore, especially in light of Judge Vanderbeck's known personal connection to the Schaefer family. Christie's father, Cary Sprunger, was reportedly a well-respected figure in the small town and a personal acquaintance of Judge Vanderbeck. During the sentencing hearing, Judge Vanderbeck himself acknowledged his acquaintance with Sprunger. To many, it appeared that small-town connections and personal relationships had played a deeply inappropriate role in determining the outcome of this case. Public outrage exploded. A group of mothers, galvanized by the perceived injustice, formed Alissa's Army, vowing to fight for justice for the little girl. Another group, Baby Alissa Cries for Justice, emerged, collecting thousands of signatures on petitions demanding a review of the case. The cry for justice for Alissa Guernsey echoed across LaGrange County, and beyond. But despite the public pressure, the legal system remained unmoved. The case, officially, remained closed. However, justice, of a different kind, would eventually catch up with Christy Schaefer. In November 2013, she was arrested again, this time for involvement in the production of methamphetamine, a clear violation of her probation terms from the neglect conviction. In April 2014, Judge Kevin Wallace sentenced her to an additional 6 years in prison for the probation violation. While not directly related to Alissa's death, this subsequent conviction offered a measure of accountability, a sense that Christy Schaefer could not entirely escape the consequences of her actions. Meanwhile, Alissa's mother, Kelly Sprunger, pursued her own path to justice. She filed a civil lawsuit for wrongful death against Christy and Matthew Schaefer. She also filed a medical malpractice lawsuit against Dr. John Egley, arguing that his failure to recognize and report the signs of abuse had contributed to Alissa's death. In August 2014, the court ruled against Kelly Sprunger in the medical malpractice suit against Dr. Egley. But the case against the Schaefers continued, a separate legal battle fought in the aftermath of the criminal proceedings. The legal proceedings surrounding Alissa Guernsey's death became a stark illustration of the imperfections within the justice system. A system that many felt had failed to protect a vulnerable child in life, and had then failed to deliver true justice in death. The light of Alissa's sunny smile had been extinguished far too soon. And the quest for accountability, for a measure of closure, would continue to reverberate long after the courtrooms fell silent. Alissa Guernsey's story compels us to confront uncomfortable truths about childcare safety and background checks, even within families. While Christy Schaefer was a relative, and not a formally vetted foster parent, this case underscores the critical need for vigilance and scrutiny in all childcare arrangements, regardless of familial ties. Should background checks and more rigorous oversight be extended to family members providing care, especially when child protective services are already involved? How can we ensure that children are truly safe, even within their own extended families? Let Alissa's memory serve as a constant call to action, a reminder that vigilance, and unwavering commitment to child safety, are not optional, they are our fundamental responsibility. We must do better. We must protect the Alissas in our world. Thank you for listening to this important story. If you want to support more true crime stories like this, stories that shed light on injustice and demand reflection, please subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us to continue bringing